Well, a very, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to those of you who are joining us in the auditorium and those of you who are joining us online from right across the world. I understand that we have guests joining us on Zoom from across Asia and even beyond Asia to hear more about this very, very pertinent topic about food security issues in Asia. My name is Vignesh. I'm from the HIT Foundation, and it's truly my honor and pleasure today to be hosting this THF dialogue about food security in Asia. Food security is certainly a very challenging issue that's facing so many countries, not just in Asia, but across the world. I think the COVID pandemic made it even more glaringly obvious how important food security is and how much of a major issue it is for many governments and many countries, and how it can upend the lives of citizens just overnight. This book is very timely. It's a book that tackles an issue that is very pertinent and very important for so many communities across the world. And so us at the HIT Foundation are really honored to be launching the book here today. For some of you who may not be too familiar with the HIT Foundation, let me just take a minute or two to share very briefly about who we are and why we are organizing this book launch here. The HIT Foundation is a modest philanthropic foundation that's based in Singapore. We have been around for slightly longer than a decade, and our focus has been on improving healthcare and education outcomes across developing Asia, specifically developing Southeast Asia. As a philanthropic organization, we work in trying to improve the quality of education through training for educators, for school leaders, by providing educational technology solutions for young people. And we look at the healthcare aspect. How can we promote a healthier lifestyle for people across the region? If we want to tackle the issue of education, we need to do that hand in hand with the issue of healthcare and well-being. Because our young people, our educators, our school leaders, they too need to be concerned and are concerned about their healthcare. So why this book launch? Why this particular issue? Well, two main reasons. As a philanthropic organization, we're very, very dependent on our partners and the experts that we work with to help deliver the meaningful initiatives and interventions that we would like to see in the region. And the author or the contributor to this book, Professor Paul Teng, has been helping the HIT Foundation for many years as our fellow, and we're very honored to work with him to launch this book today. But secondly, as I've learned so much from my years of chatting with Professor Teng, food security is a real issue. Education is a way to solve a lot of the world's problems. But if we don't deal with many of the other underlying issues, and a big part of that is food security, quality educators can only do that much. How much can you learn if you go to a classroom being hungry? So that is why this is an issue that we at the HIT Foundation feel is very important, very timely, and something that we're very, very pleased to have in as part of our THF dialogue today. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now invite Ambassador Ong Keng Yong, who has very kindly agreed to launch this book, who is the Executive Deputy Chair of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Relations at the Nanyang Technological University. He'll be delivering a welcome message and launching the book. Ambassador Ong, please.
Thank you, Vinish. Yeah. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I must confess that I didn't expect the book to be so thick. Wonderful, Paul. Now I know where you hide away and do whatever thing you are doing. Yeah. Yeah. So I must tell you that one of my close family members, one of my relatives staying in Jamaica, and the guy may be probably looking in, so I had to be behaving very well and don't say the nonsensical stuff that I used to do in a lively discussion like this. This book, in case those of you want to see this online, is an accomplishment of Professor Paul Teng and his team. And it is on a very important subject which not many of us think about every day or every week, but it is a very essential element of our existence. So it is important that we get to know the subject a bit better. Yeah. And it's a very timely book because of all the elements and developments which you will hear about from myself and a few others who will be speaking at this gathering. But let me say, events in the past few years, especially the fighting in war zones and all the consequences of this kind of military conflict, have resulted in quite a lot of disruption with regard to the supply of food, the food supply chain, transportation, and other kind of considerations. So going forward, we better be more aware and understand what are the things that we need to do and how can we ensure that all those very bad consequences will not flow from all this development that we have seen in the past few years. According to Professor Teng, his advice to me is Asia is actually more than 60% of the world population, right? But is Asia able to produce enough food to feed these 60% of the world population? That is a big challenge. And I suspect not many leaders of individual countries have come together and look at the whole picture in a systematic way. All that we know from time to time is that, because of the war in Ukraine, now we have no steady supply of food grain or fertilizer. What do we do? No, it's available, you just pay more money. Yeah, that will bring us to another level. The small amount of national budget we have to pay for all these increased food prices. And on top of that, other costs. Yeah, the development in the food chain, in the agricultural arena, are not without other kind of consequences in the other part of the economy. Most commonly, stress has been the drop in currency value, exchange rate between importing countries' currency and the exporter currency. So all these things bring us to a very critical juncture. How do we find a way to ensure that the food security is safeguarded? And maybe we should go beyond just immediate solution, find ways to prepare ourselves for all those other consequences that will come in the coming months or years. The book is timely in the sense that we are addressing many issues. You can see that from the thick book by itself. There are many topics, and some of these things really bring together all the various developments, factors, and the assessment of the individual authors, how they see these challenges going forward and how they can cajole the public, the policymakers, and even people in the media and opinion-making circles to start seriously organizing themselves and be prepared to consider the further consequences coming out. So I hope all of you would be able to have a chance to look at substantive issues which Paul and his fellow writers have tried to put together in a comprehensive manner, and understand that this food security is not something quite isolated, or it can be settled separately without worry about the other strategic and political economic development. So without further ado, I will just commend this book to all of you. I do not know whether the question of affordability will come in, but in line with the preparedness that we are talking about in ensuring our food security, there must be a certain level of affordability. So enjoy reading the book, and I look forward to exchanging more ideas on the issue of food security at our research work in the S. Rajaratnam School of International Study at the Nanyang Technological University. So congratulations, Paul, and all your contributors. And of course, to this very important host here, the Head Foundation, for making possible this particular exchange of views to further reinforce some of the important messages that we need to send out there. And hopefully some of us will organize ourselves in terms of policy management in a better way. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ong. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to the more substantive part of today's conversation, where we have Professor Paul Teng and a couple of other authors who are going to be sharing about their sections, their chapters in the book, but also to then move on to a discussion, a panel discussion, where we'll be able to take questions, both from the audience members in the room, but also for those of you joining us on Zoom. And especially those of you who are joining us on Zoom, I do encourage you, do type your questions into the Q&A chat box, and Professor Paul Teng will be moderating the discussion. We'll take your questions from there. Do identify yourself. But ladies and gentlemen, now it's truly my privilege and a pleasure to introduce a fellow of the Head Foundation and the Managing Director and Dean of the National Institute of Education, Professor Paul Teng. Prof.
Well, thank you very much, Vignesh. Let me start by also perhaps repeating some thanks. I think the first is obviously to the Head Foundation for kindly hosting this facility. As you can see, it's a wonderful facility for a group like this. Second is to really, again, thank Ambassador Ong. You know, a lot of people don't realize, but Ambassador Ong has had a long-term interest in food security. He was the ASEAN Secretary General for many years. And as part of my role in RSIS, together with Prof Melly, they really encouraged me to really take a strong interest in food security. Now, of course, I also need to thank all the authors, some of whom are here, but many of whom are not here today, for the, I guess, the passion that they've been able to show to make sure that this book comes into fruition. It's been a labor of love, in a sense, for many of us, to make sure that the contents of this book are shared, because, as Ambassador Ong said, food security is indeed important, also timely. Okay? So with that, what I'd like to do is, I'm going to kickstart the seminar. And also, you might be wondering, why a seminar with a book launch? I think we saw an opportunity to reinforce the learnings. Because the book launch, hopefully you'll be able to afford the book. And let me just say that there's a special discounted price today, only today, I believe it is. Yeah, so do get a copy if you can. But all we have time to do today, really, to coincide with the launch, with this particular seminar, is have a sampling of the authors and myself, share with you some key points. Obviously, there are many issues that affect food security in Asia. Let me go through my first slide. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is really food security issues in Asia, the impact on Singapore. We want to link it back to Singapore. And these are basically the speakers that you will hear from today. I'll introduce them briefly after, just before each of them gives their particular spiel. Okay, why should Asia be concerned? Okay. I think there are many obvious reasons. One of them, as Ambassador Ong has mentioned, he cited me for that. Asia has 48 countries. Basically, it's roughly a quarter of the United Nations total, and yet 60% of the world's population, right? And that 60% of the world's population has to be fed on only 37% of the world's arable land. So that's how challenging it is, which is why one of the points, in fact, covered in the book is how productivity per unit area and per unit labor has to be so much higher in Asia to be able to feed ourselves. And that's also where technology comes in. So I kind of like to show this slide to really set the context. Okay? And the other important things to recognize, as to why Asia is important is that we're the world's region, which is probably the most prone to unexpected weather and severe disasters, okay, by all accounts. Now, on top of that, we've got some of the world's largest importers of important food items like rice. Okay? Asia may host the top 3 rice-growing countries. It also has the top 2 rice importing countries. I think that's an irony, isn't it? right? But yet, those are the facts of life, which is why when in one of the chapters in the book, we deal with trade, the importance of trade. But let me move on, because these are just to highlight some points here, some talking points here, and to perhaps reinforce in your minds why we need to consider food security in Asia. Over the last year or so, because of COVID and the Ukraine crisis, my colleagues and I at RSIS, we actually put out a lot of these op-eds to try and influence people. Okay, one of the first things I've realized as a scientist is that you can publish the best tier 1 paper, right? The most number of readers is maybe 500 if you're lucky, right? Whereas you put on an op-ed, it goes to thousands of people, and that's how you influence folks. Okay, I mean, very big change, in fact, in mindset. So if you look at some of the papers that were put out in the last year or so, as to what the warning signs are, okay, so why we're in trouble actually. You know, our big dependency on let me just check. Our big dependency on imports, especially ASEAN, okay, and also the appetite for fish and for animal protein. It's just astronomical here in Asia Pacific, right? And with that, of course, the environmental concerns. Now, also warning signs that we need to take action, okay? Especially in the context of the geopolitical tensions that are occurring, even in terms of technology itself, right? The tension between, for example, the US and China with regards to certain items of technology which are considered sensitive, right? Which we, in fact, in Asia need, right? To make sure that we can produce the kind of tech that helps us with labor productivity and land productivity. And also moving on, an additional consideration, since COP28, and one of my co-authors here, you know, the fact that we're not just concerned about producing more food, we're also very concerned, in fact, about what we call the negative externalities of food production. And rice is the classic example. Okay, one of the papers I wrote, which has about 20,000 reads, you know, is the fact that rice production is in fact becoming a wicked problem. Okay, when you want to grow more rice under paddy conditions, you also produce a lot of methane. Okay, and methane is such a potent greenhouse gas, you know, that affects global warming. So those are some of the new issues that face us in Asia, especially. Okay, not to say that other parts of the world don't face those issues, but it's all condensed here in the Asia continent. So it's so important. So what have we done in the book? Basically, the book reflects, you know, a view of the many conversations I've had with many people on what are the key issues we need to tackle in Asia. Obviously, I had the privilege of starting it off, you know, and talking about some of the unresolved issues. Now, even though I might sound pessimistic, we actually have made very good progress in Asia. Okay? For the first Green Revolution in India, where we stave off hunger for millions of people because of the first Green Revolution. But since that time, obviously, the doubly Green Revolution has become the mantra. We need to figure out how to produce more food without affecting the environment. So we have a very nice chapter written by the International Rice Research Institute that talks about the future of rice, the most important food grain in the world, because it feeds the most number of people. Then some of the other items like fish, okay? Fish, livestock, vegetables. Now, vegetables have come on the radar nowadays, not because of the need for calories, but because of nutrition. And I'm happy that Jeff is here in the audience as well. Nutrition security is now really one of the key points that we need to consider in food security. Without nutrition security, you can't get total food security at all. Then we go on to talk about other things, especially in this first part of the book. And here's where we wanted to highlight the two giants, right? China and India. As we all know, India is the world's biggest exporter of rice. Why? China is one of the biggest producers of food. But in many years, China is also a big food importer, especially back to rice. Especially when China goes into the market to buy rice, it basically reduces the amount of rice available because rice is such a thinly traded commodity, about 7% every year, right? So those are the kind of balances that we really need to address. Now, we also wanted to look at the role of technology, especially for Singapore, right? How can Singapore play a role, right? We've always heard all our politicians, leaders say that, hey, we want Singapore to be an agri-tech hub. Why? How? What are the implications? So for that, my colleague, Louis, who was a lead investigator in one of the projects that we did for the ASEAN Secretariat on digital agriculture, will share a little bit the highlights. Okay, what is in the book itself. why is digitalization so important to move us along? Okay, in terms of, again, back to labor, land, water productivity, all those issues. Then biotechnology, we really don't have anybody to speak about that, but we have one of the most prominent researchers in this area, Prof Jaya, will touch on nutrition. Okay? New technologies to help us really improve nutrition security, which is so key, especially with the novel food and so on. So some of the other chapters you can see touch on different aspects of technology, which we consider very important. But technology cannot come out of thin air if it does not get funding to generate the technology. That's why this is one of the few books on food security where we've included a chapter on private sector investments, but also on how to protect those investments. And that's what Dr. Andrew Powell later on will talk about. What are the investments? How do we protect them? Because you can generate as much technology as you want. If there's no social license for that technology, it's actually wasted. No acceptance, right? And we learned this the hard way from the biotech crop debacle decades ago, that we need to prepare the consumer. We need to prepare stakeholders to accept new technologies, especially novel technologies and novel food itself. So the rest of the book deals with this part here. How do we actually make more food available? Apart from technology itself, the actual process of having a volume of food and kilograms of food. And this is where I mentioned trade. And we've got an excellent chapter on trade that talks about balances, food dependency, import dependency. What can countries do about it? Okay? And this chapter was put together by the Food Center in the University of Asia and the Pacific in the Philippines. Okay? There's a very well-known food research center there, which is usually not that well recognized compared to some of the other big food research centers in other parts of the world. Then, of course, urban agriculture, which Singapore is moving very fast into. There's a chapter on that. Aquaculture. Okay, aquaculture to address the fact that wild fisheries, captured fisheries are declining at very shocking rates, right? We've got some marine scientists like Prof Shirley Lim sitting in the audience. You know, the fact is that our wild fisheries today are only 10 to 15% what they used to be decades ago. And even the composition of fish has changed. So how do you replace that? Aquaculture. And Singapore is trying to spend a lot of money, time, invest in new technologies for aquaculture, especially indoor aquaculture, on-land aquaculture, and not mariculture. Many countries practice mariculture, you know, growing fish in the oceans and so on. Then we've also decided to cover, again, a growing topic, which is novel food, in this case, alternative proteins. Yeah, again, another issue which Singapore has invested so much in, to make sure that whether it's cultivated chicken, cultivated meat, you know, cultured meat, or whether it's plant-based protein or insect protein, right? So those are all the kind of novel foods that we talk about. I don't know, is Melanie here? Oh, sorry. Sure. I was also going to mention that there are several authors in the book that we didn't have time to feature today in the presentation, but they'll be happy to answer questions. Yellow biotechnology, insects as a source of protein for direct consumption and for ingredients to make other ingredients, so to speak, like aqua feed, for example, you know. So this is a sampling, in fact. And then, of course, we also address other issues like food loss and waste. And somebody from the Food and Agriculture Organization that's very concerned about food waste. She actually took time to do this in sort of a very busy schedule, running FAO's, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, running FAO's food loss program. Okay? In fact, we had another writer from FAO who's in charge of the climate change program for Southeast Asia, also write a chapter for us, okay, spelling out what the UN's position is in terms of mitigation, but also adaptation, to solve the climate change issue. And then finally, of course, and I first started talking about externalities, negative externalities, from growing more food. Because we all know we need more food, but we need to produce that food sustainably and with minimum impact on the environment, on society, and so on. So we addressed a few of these externalities. One of which was to look at the role of security in the presence of calamities. Okay? In this case, we use more as a sample. Of course, then food innovation, which I mentioned earlier, that Dr. Powell is going to talk about that. You know, we need to support to create environments that allow innovation. Because, you know, being creative is one thing, but being able to take that creative solution to become an innovation is an entirely different process altogether. And most scientists actually don't have a clue, I can say that very honestly, how to innovate the whole chain itself. We're also ending this all, of course, we have a chapter deal with consumer acceptance. Okay? What do consumers want? How do they react to novel food? Yeah, and this is done by a group from the Nanyang Technological University, Shirley Ho and the team. Because we saved one of the best to the last, which is looking to the future. Okay? And this is where the last chapter of the book deals with trends, taking a rather unconventional futuring approach. And I'm really honored to that the author of that chapter is here, Luke Tay, with us today. So if any questions, you can also ask him. So with that, that's my quick overview as to why we need to be concerned about food security in Asia. Now, my last slide really tries to summarize why should Singapore be concerned. Okay? I think this actually, to me, is a very simple summary. Yeah? The new reality in today's world is that no country is an island, no pun intended. Okay, so we're all dependent so much on supply chains that emanate from different parts of the world. That's very key, right? So for Singapore, if we want to be a player, we must be connected. We must contribute, right? We must also recognize and have a good scanning of what's happening around the world in order to allow our policymakers, our decision makers, to make evidence-based decisions. Very key indeed, right? Science-based decisions. So, okay, so with that, that was my quick spiel, and I have gotten the 1 minute card. I'm just done. So with that, let me now introduce the next speaker, Prof. Jaya Henry, who really needs no introduction. You know, Singapore courted Prof. Jaya Henry to come here, okay, from somewhere else. And he is the, don't blush, he's the founding director, basically of the whole area of clinical nutrition science in Singapore. Okay, prior to him being here, there really wasn't much, wasn't anything done at all, right? So Prof. Jaya has now stepped down as the director, founding director of the Clinical Nutrition Research Center. He's now a senior advisor to SIFBI, the Singapore Institute of Food and Biotech Innovation. Yeah, a relatively new institute that was started in 2019, I believe, right? So Jaya, floor is yours. Okay.
Thank you very much, Paul, for those very kind words. Can you hear me at the back? If not, I'm happy to change places. But on a more serious note, Paul, I think I've got to start with an incredible compliment to you. You have pulled together a very, very diverse, eclectic, but very cohesive book of 27 chapters, which I think is going to be a magnum opus on the aspects of food security issues in Asia. In fact, as a caveat, the Holy Bible has 66 books, and you're halfway there. So I think that's a pretty good accolade. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to spend time on the topic that Professor Paul talked about, and novel, parentheses, food technologies to enhance nutrition security. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a very turbulent part of the century, but I want to draw your attention to my presentation in the context of we are living in the midst of a global health paradox, where one half of the world is overweight and obese, and the other part of the world is undernourished. And in fact, in Asia, we have cheek and jowl, both overnutrition and undernutrition. And I think that's an important paradigm, which is that we are in a part of the world where we have the dual burden of overnutrition and undernutrition. Now, in fact, most of our narrative, we hear about the affliction of overnutrition causing type 2 diabetes, and all of that is absolutely true. But I think the more hidden hunger is what Paul has already alluded to, is something I think we need to pay much more attention. I also want to draw your attention to this slide part here, which is that 46% of South Asians do not have access to health and affordable diets. Notably, we're also a region of the world that has got severe malnutrition and undernutrition and nutrient deficiencies, even in the most affluent parts of this region. So, our theme today is to talk about food technology. But isn't it a stroke of irony that modern technology is no more than 200 years old? With the advent of canning by the French chemist Nicolas Appert in 1806. And this area of activity, food technology, enables us to transform all of these raw ingredients into foods that are safe, extended shelf life, sustainable, that has allowed our global population to exponentially grow. But I think it was only in the 1960s, with the classical study by Ansel Keys and co-workers from Minnesota in their famous 7-country study, that showed that there's a direct connection between what you eat and your cholesterol level and your disease etiology. 1960. But here's the paradox. We in Asia have been talking about this for 5,000 years. Food is medicine, medicine is food. Both Chinese and Indian pharmacopoeia have been saying that for euphemistically donkey's years. But I think it took the landmark study by Ansel Keys to position food in terms of its impact on health, and therefore food technology, nutrition becomes center stage. And I want to posit that in the years to come and the years that are beyond us, this connection between good nutrition and health is profoundly important, because it turns out that really you can alter the face of your health activity by what you eat today. So diet has got a both spatial and a configurational effect of cause and reality. So in the interest of time, I'm only going to talk about a couple of examples. The first example is something that's relatively new called pulse electric field, which is a very simple way that you use very high voltage in milliseconds over a repeated cycle, particularly to actually look at ways that you can kill microbes. But the trick of the trade is that in addition to the bugs and the microbes, it also affects the cell structure of the food material. So we can use the technology as a double whammy, reduce microbial load, but also change the transformation of the food from what it was to what it could be. And I think that's a very novel idea of this duality. So the first example I'm going to share with you is this, that isn't it a shameful paradox that 80% of the world lives on 4 staples, which are rice, wheat, corn, and potato. And it is therefore impossible that in the years to come that we can live on these 4 staples alone as a source of carbohydrate. We need to look at alternative sources, and that's why we think that this idea of underexploited plant material is going to become big. As many of you know, that millet has now been poised as a very important cereal from all parts of the world. But I want to share with you a very interesting project that we did some years ago in A-Star, which is this one here, where we took jack seeds, jackfruit seeds. How many of you love jackfruits? I love it, by the way. But we throw the goddamn seed, right? But the seed has got incredible amount of starch. With some interventions using high pressure processing, we can take the starch and make these bao, which I love. So this bao here is 40% replaced by jack seeds. So the question is, how can we marry modern technology with valorization that we are even completely ignored to make a whole new genre of food that we never thought about? The second area I think that's going to play a pivotal role is minimizing food losses, which are astronomical. 50% of all fruits and vegetables that are harvested go to waste. So here again, Paul, you are kind of, prophetic and saying dark green leafy vegetables are highly perishable. When I go to buy my kangkung this morning, it's dead in the evening. How do you extend the shelf life of dark green leafy vegetables? Again, using the kind of technology I talked about, high pressure processing and or pulse electric. Now, I think this comes back to another example that I wanted to share with you. Mango seeds are produced in very large quantities around the world. And the most expensive commodity in all developing countries is oil. But here is the trick or the sting in the tail. The mango seed oil has the same composition, oleic acid, as olive oil. Olive oil is rich in oleic acid. And the mango seed that we throw away has got the same fatty acid profile as olive oil. So I'm trying to share with you how can we look at innocuous throwaway products. Valorization becomes a part of our paradigm in a way that I think we have not hitherto looked at. And I want to end with this rather contentious slide because I think this is going to be the kernel of the future of Asia. Most of our industry has been focusing on the apex or this part of the pyramid of the population. But the base of the pyramid is not only large, but is completely not served by the food companies or food industry at large. So the challenge is, how can we transform the people at the base of the pyramid, which predominantly are what are living in our part of the world, to provide what I call low-cost, high-value foods from the kinds of ideas and research that we can do from Singapore, because Singapore can be an epicenter of making it an institution of looking at low-cost, high-value foods. And I think this is a telling tale, which is that of almost 1 billion people that are undernourished in the world, half of them live in this region. And so how can we as civil society ever afford to ignore this large caucus of people that have never been addressed systematically? And I think this is what you said about, if you talk about food security, it's actually nutritional security. That's exactly why the SFA says 30% of our nutritional security, not food security, because food is quantity, nutrition is quality. And I think that paradigm is very important. So I want to end by saying, ladies and gentlemen, that I think moving forward, we in Singapore have a golden opportunity to become the epicenter of research on developing low-cost, high-value foods for our region and beyond. And in that way, we can really say to ourselves, we led lives of consequence. Last but not least, we are also bestowed by having incredible opportunistic research paradigm in Singapore, A-Star, SIFB, and many universities, NTU, NUS, all of them, and the university polytechnics are all involved with nutrition. And the looking at low-cost food might be the future for us to really be able to say we do something that will contribute to our humankind in a much more systematic and pivotal way. And I think just to summarize, so I think really the concept I'm going to share with you is that nutrition is going to play a pivotal role. Novel technologies can not only extend shelf life, but also enhance nutrition. But I think the key point is say, can we consider developing low-cost, high-value food using the matrimony of technology and nutrition? And I think this will be something that we can really share together as a collective whole. Thank you very much indeed. And by the way, these are the guys who did all the hard work. I just do the talking. So these are my researchers. So a big shout out to all of them. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So much for that. Okay, you can hear me, right? Okay. Well, let's move on now to the next presentation, which is, just 1 second. This is by Dr. Montesclaros, Louis Montesclaros from RSIS in NTU. As I mentioned earlier, Louis has been leading a couple of big studies actually on the status of digital technology to move agriculture along, okay? And not just rural, but also urban in a way, yeah? And of course, as we all know, AgTech is one area that we think Singapore can play, make a difference to the rest of the world. So Louis, maybe I'll just let you take the floor.
Thank you, Prof. It's an honor to be here. And I think that for most of us here, food and food security are more than just work. It's actually a passion. So, and I'm honored to be joining this esteemed panel. And okay, so I will be discussing about the work that we have done at the Center for Non-Traditional Security Studies at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, focusing on digital agriculture and food security. So our center has these annual fast facts, and you can see here this fast fact on rice and why we need a digital revolution. In the next 25 years or so, there will be 2 billion more people who will be consuming rice. We will need to increase production by 25%, and yet, owing to climate change, productivity is set to fall by 10%. At the same time, rice uses one-third of the world's developed fresh water, contributes 1.5 of global carbon emissions, 12% of methane emissions, and also to add to that, we have an aging and declining population in the rural sector. So this is why we need a digital revolution. And so across Southeast Asia, there are further challenges. This second image here is what we see. Productivity growth used to be the green arrow on the left side, whereby it had exponential growth or accelerating growth rates. But in the recent 3 decades, the past 3 decades, this growth rate has turned into diminishing growth rates, so slowing down rates of growth. And at the same time, food security, global food security, rests in the hands of smallholder farmers. So imagine such a complex challenge of a sector that, unlike manufacturing, is more vulnerable to the different seasons, is subject to different geographical challenges, proximity to markets. And all of these are left mostly to the smallholder farmers. Of course, governments can play a role in supporting them, but ultimately the decision maker on how much inputs to use, how to plant, is the smallholder. And finally, COVID-19 also has disrupted the food sector previously in terms of the access to inputs. So all of these three point to why a digital revolution is needed. How might this revolution look like? So I know that our studies were mostly on Southeast Asia, but first I'll look outside the region. We look at China. In 2017, China's ChemChina Corporation purchased Syngenta, as we all know. And why did they do this? So they bought over Syngenta for $43 billion because they saw that they had outdated agricultural systems. All of the challenges I shared in the previous slide are faced by Southeast Asia, but also by China and many other countries globally. And so what did they do after purchasing it? They could now use the intellectual property to be able to deploy technologies that gather more information about what the farmers need. So they had modern agricultural platforms of satellite mapping. And through this, they were able to identify which of the inputs globally, whether from Germany or from the United States, were needed by their farmers to be more efficient. Thank you. And as a result, they had 384 solution centers, 900 demonstration farms for these, covering 11.62 million mu, which is roughly 740,000 hectares back in 2021. And now it's able to use it as a form of diplomacy, for instance, in reaching out to countries like Malaysia in developing green food. So this is what actually Southeast Asia needs, this kind of big push. And so in our study, we identified, so I am, the study is with Professor Paul Teng and also Professor Melly Caballero Anthony. And in this study, we look at the different technologies that are needed to achieve this digital revolution within Southeast Asia. These involve mostly technologies in gathering data, crop data, helping farmers with their decision making, and finally applying these, right? Replacing or supporting the farmers on the ground with more the labor to track how crops are doing, etc. And so we envisioned, can we see ASEAN a future wherein across all ASEAN, all farmers practice smart farming by default, and also wherein we have 360-degree real-time information availability across all farms and fisheries. Next, I'll talk about supply chains. Within India, which is among the largest producers, it has a lot of transparency at different chain. At the same time, it has this Aadhaar digital identity, where each individual has a 12-digit number, which is used for reducing the leakages in giving out grains such as rice. And digital identities also contribute to reducing the leakages in fertilizers, for instance, by ensuring that all the farmer that receives it are actually using it on their land. So for supply chains, these are the technologies that we uncovered in our study. So what we notice is that technologies are here and there, like they are everywhere. But we needed to find a way to organize the information. So this blue is like for finance, and orange is for supply chains. And finally, these are the challenges and policy opportunities for Southeast Asia. So on the left side, you'll see the baseline status for digital technology adoption. And on the right side, we've summed these up into 5 key issues. First, smallholder farmers face capitalization challenges. Second, there are cultural and trust barriers in promoting these technologies. So farmers may distrust the private companies that sell them. Thirdly, e-commerce, as of the time when we conducted this, was still sporadic and insufficient. Fourth, there is also a lack of interoperability across digital applications, as you can see here with these 2 robots. Like digital applications on the ground are not able to interface with one another because each producer actually wants to be that producer that gives out all of the technologies to the farmers, the full scale of it. But in seeking to do that, they trap the farmers in using more of their technologies along the way. So it becomes a bad bargain for the farmers. So what we were thinking was, what if all of these providers could harmonize their standards so that a farmer can switch from one to another? There are no market barriers towards switching. Therefore, the farmers will have more freedom, and then we have a more open market. So how do we do this? Partly by developing an ASEAN platform for data applications, like an ASEAN API, and also by setting a harmonized standard for data applications in agriculture. And of course, the intellectual property hurdles will need to be overcome for better information sharing across the limited actors that are playing in the field. And finally, we need enabling infrastructure for digitalization, which is already well known. I think I'm doing good on time. So I'll just show this last slide. So our study was fed into the ASEAN guidelines for promoting digital technologies in the region. And this was the state of the region in 2020, 2021, where we have mostly farmer advisory services, digital advisory services. This is sourced from these three key databases you see on top: AgFunder, Grow Asia, and GSM Association. And traceability is also among the key supply chain technologies. Yep. So yeah, what is possible? And we feel that this is a potential approach towards achieving all of the outcomes identified here, starting with our envisioned outcomes here. Scaled up breakthrough innovations can be achieved through the key drivers, which are government extension, private engagement, financing to farmers, best practice sharing, and engagement with local capacity builders. To support these key drivers, so if anyone uses a balanced scorecard, they probably are familiar with this framework of outcomes, drivers, support. So you need ICT logistics, the business environment, as Andrew will be sharing on later, and secure and transparent market for data service. And finally, the resources, both public and private. So I conclude. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Louis. I think agree with me that Louis made a very compelling case as to why we need digital technology and how Singapore can actually play. Be a major player, right, for the rest of Asia and indeed for the rest of the world, actually. So let me know. It gives you great pleasure now to go on to the last presentation. Louis had quite a few more slides, didn't he? You ran out of time, huh? Oh, here we go. Yeah. Andrew's now going to take us through. I won't really introduce him very much, but he's one of the few expats I know who has lived in Singapore longer than I have. Yeah? He's actually lived in Singapore how many years? 34th year, okay? Which means that, you know, he probably knows Asia better than quite a few of us here, okay? But on a serious note, I think Andrew's one of the most knowledgeable people on agriculture in this part of the world, okay? And he's been running his own company, giving advisory services for many, many years now, right? So I was very glad that he agreed to write a chapter on how to enable innovation. In other words, after the funding part, how do you make sure that the innovation continues, which is a very important part of the DNA of Singapore, indeed, right? Because we all think we know how to commercialize. But in the case of agri-food ecosystem, there's a lot more that meets the eye. So Andrew, with that quick introduction, why don't we hear from you?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm not an expatriate. I actually live here. You know, that word, Paul, really irritates me, to be honest. I get these people calling me up. We're talking to all the expatriates in Singapore. Next. I'm not an expatriate. Okay, Ambassador Ong, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here to talk to you this afternoon about a couple of things that impact innovation, the innovation pathway. But before I do that, Paul's asked me to talk about about the investment scene globally and to a limited extent around Asia itself as well. I'll then talk about a couple of things that really I think need to be considered along the innovation pathway as regulations and communication. You might have seen a few things I've written before. I really like talking about communication, and well, you'll see a bit more about that later. Okay, what's been happening in the world over the last 5 or 6 years? Well, on the left-hand side, you'll see there was a large amount of money going into the agri-food sector around the world, reaching $53 billion in 2021. Since then, however, the funding has dried up for agri-food technology, but really it's dried up for every other sector as well. It's not a pretty scene for investment in technology in general at the moment. of the 260, well, of the 2023 numbers, the $16 billion, about a quarter of that was invested in Asia. Now, where's that money going? Well, agri-food technology is kind of broken up into three different areas: upstream, midstream, and downstream. You know that peak in 2021 where the largest amount of investment was going on? A lot of that money was going into the downstream. And a couple of really big deals in China meant those numbers were really, really inflated. Practically everybody and their dog were setting things up, setting platforms up. Platforms to sell organic vegetables online, all the way through to probably choice cuts of dog food or for meat to be distributed online. It was incredible. Every week you saw multiple groups setting up platforms for distribution of X, Y, or Z. Over the last 2 years or so, though, that balance has changed, in my view, for the better, because we're seeing much more money, albeit at a lower level, going into the upstream part of agri-food technology. We've got a lot of investment going into ag-biotech, ag-tech, particularly into bioenergy and renewables. A lot more money's gone into that, particularly in the last year. So the balance of investment has changed over the last 3 years, and much more is going into that upstream sector. Some has been going into the midstream technologies like food safety and traceability, which is very valuable, but the situation has changed a great deal. Now, what is this investment used for? Well, it's invested to support the movement from invention to a product that is innovative and that has impact on society. I think the word innovation is really overused, and a lot of the time people are inventors and not innovators. For me, innovation has to have an impact on society. So tell me what you're doing for society when you're an innovator. That pathway is traumatic. There's a lot of risks involved along that pathway. From the beginning, you're going through, perhaps if you're an academic institute, you're going through always some various kinds of stage gating, assessing whether your technology is going to make it. Then you're going to have financial risk to try and raise money for that. Then you're going to go through regulatory risk and then ultimately market risk as well. But there's a couple of things I want to talk about along that pathway that need to be put in place to ensure that pathway actually functions. One of which is something that governments can do. And the other thing is something that the companies, the actual companies who are saying, we're going to be innovators, what they can do as well. And I want to talk about the regulatory policy development, which is the government side of things, and then what the companies can do to gain consumer acceptance and all-important social license to operate. Now, social license is this thing that people want to feel comfortable with the way the company is behaving and doing its business. You've got to be accepted by the local communities and the stakeholders in the community. If you haven't got that, like Monsanto didn't have for biotech at some point, then you're going to be in trouble. Let's look at regulations. The problem with technology is it moves really fast. Well, that's a good thing. But the problem is the politics or the regulatory policies don't advance at the same speed. Governments are not designed to work fast. And so generally, they're not designed to work fast. But the technology develops rapidly. And when this happens, there's all kinds of problems for the people developing the technology. They go into regulatory bottlenecks and the process can slow down. We saw that in GM crops, for example, where some countries advance the GM regulations quite quickly, but even now some countries still haven't got GM crop regulations or food regulations in place. So that is a problem. Now, fortunately, in Singapore, we're not necessarily in that situation. You know, the cynic in me would say, oh, Singapore's developed these great regulations on cultured meats. cultivated meat. Well, I said, well, why wouldn't they? They're spending all this money, and they want it to be successful. But really, in reality, Singapore was very foresightful in that they started developing these regulations way before the interest in cultivated meats started to develop. Tick. That's what companies need to be able to move forward. They need those policies to be put in place. They need those policies to be scientifically sound. Science-based policies are what companies need to be able to move forward. Singapore did well on that, and we're seeing other countries advancing on regulatory policy for cultivated meat. But we're seeing other countries like Italy, France, and states in the US all banning cultivated meat. So the US didn't advance their policy so quickly, started to get a lot of bad press, and it's all imploding in certain states. So we've really got to develop these policies quickly before all the negativity comes forth and stymies the whole thing. A good and then bad example of regulatory policy development was in drones in agriculture. Japan was one of the first developers of drone helicopters for agriculture in around about the 90s, and now a lot of people are using drones. The problem is the technology or the regulations have not kept up with the technology. We can send bombs on drones. We can send some healthcare on drones in Africa, but we can't use drones in agriculture without having what we call line of sight. You can play games or you can have races with your drones where you're managing the drones based on the camera in your drone, but you can't use cameras in drones for agriculture. You've got to be able to see it. And if you can't see it, you're using those drones illegally. So if you want to spray your crop, plant seeds, or whatever, you can't do it unless you see your drone. So the policies slowed down, the policy development has slowed down in that case. Next session. How do you communicate all this innovation is very important. And this is where the companies need to do some work. We see there's three ways of talking about innovation. One, public relations, get people excited, make people aware of the technology. Science communications, educate, perhaps enthuse. But what happens if society or people in that society sort of says, I'm not so sure about this. They start pushing back, as all innovations get. All innovations get pushed back. Coffee was an innovation, got pushed back. Canning got pushed back. Microwave ovens got pushed back. The motor car engine, antibiotics, vaccines, all got pushed back. GM crops. Wow, plant-based meats, fantastic. Oh, we'll never get pushed back. You can bet your bottom dollar you're going to get pushed back. So people should have realized that. And they should have put in place this other type of communication called risk communication. Now, what is risk communication? Well, it's a science-based approach for communicating effectively in situations of high concern, low trust, sensitive or controversial situations. It's the science of communicating in high stress, controversial or emotionally charged situations. And when there's pushback, the situations can get emotionally charged and quite noisy. Now, the fundamental basis of RISCOM is the understanding of people. Who do you go to get an understanding of people? It's not science and technologists. It's social scientists. And social science informs the way we communicate about technology using risk communication strategies. Now, the problem is that the balance has been wrong quite a lot of the time in the communication of innovation. It's all been PR. There's been precious little science communication and certainly very little risk communication. And that applies big time to future foods. Plant-based meats, cultivated meats, and precision fermentation. The balance has been all wrong. And now we're getting pushback. There's been some real fundamental communication errors in many technologies, but most recently in future foods, we've seen a failure to really understand the profound changes that consumers are being asked to make. We're asking people to change their lives. We're asked maybe even their culture, not just their diet. It's really important that some of the things that we're asking them to change. That's not a trivial undertaking. The other thing that that industry has tended to forget is that the expert view of what is likely to be important in making decisions about emerging technologies may not tally with the view of the public. That was published 20 odd years ago by Professor Lynn Frewer from Newcastle University. And she works with the company Asia Biobusiness as an advisor on RISCOM. And that is really a fundamental thing, that there's a real difference between technologists and the lay people. They look at risk, and the risk associated with change considerably different to technologists. And if technologists don't take into account the difference in the way they think compared to the lay person or the lay people population, then they're going to get themselves into trouble. Okay, that was a bit rapid. Two points there. Regulatory policy needs to be put in place. And then, gosh, we've got to do a better job at communicating with the people. And it's not all PR. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks so much, Andrew. The better? Anyway, well, thanks very much, Andrew. It is okay. Let me just mention, Andrew, perhaps the purpose didn't want to mention this, but this area of risk communication training is something that I think is so fundamental if you're trying to advance the technology, right? So the good news is that Andrew and I, in fact, are conducting a risk communication workshop on April 4th and 5th. And it's free of charge, first come, first serve. Okay? And this has been supported through the Good Food Institute, a big proponent of future food. Right? So we can probably take a few more if anybody is interested. Just either write to me or to Head Foundation, and we'll take some numbers. Yeah. This is our second RISCOM workshop. I say we don't often do it free of charge, but this is a free of charge workshop. Okay, with that, may I now invite the panel to come up here? Then we'll go into our open session. Here we've got at least 30 minutes for the open session. Okay. Now, may I also ask that we'll take questions from the floor first. Okay. Please speak into the microphone because this is being recorded. Okay. And also those who are on Zoom can hear you on the microphone. If the microphone works. Where's my okay, all right. Okay.
You're like a lounge singer.
Okay, so who's going to break the ice? Where's the microphone? Oh, okay, over there. Question to any of the panelists, including myself. Okay. And
Sure. Hello. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
right
Okay.
here.
Please. Can you give your name and just tell me?
Yeah. My name's Oliver Truesdale. I'm a chef by trade, so not involved in food tech, but very concerned about food security in general, and yeah, focused in sort of the sustainable future of food in general. I think it's a very interesting conversation, and obviously each person has their own select sort of point of focus. But I was wondering, in the book in general, if you had anything about sort of soil-focused farming or regenerative agriculture, because I've been seeing this sort of trend towards a focus on technology, and it seems to enable sort of a large amount of the things that have caused the problems that put us in this situation we're in. And I've, over a career in food, sort of developed the opinion that regenerative ag seems to be the only real solution, but it's a difficult vehicle for investment. It's a difficult, so it's kind of this tension between an actual solution seems attractive to modern society to a degree. So I was just wondering if any of you had insight into that tension or how you feel about that at all. Maybe I'm completely wrong. So, cheers.
You don't want to try this first, or
You should go in that one.
we don't have a specific chapter in the book on sustainability or regen agriculture, but it's embedded in different chapters, including mine. Yeah, and I totally agree with you that the future of food is not all about technology. You know, I emphasize technology here. Technology really helps in terms of productivity. Okay. Now, regen agriculture, which is basically agriculture that tries to improve soil health, basically, in a very broad sense, right? Right? In other words, you leave the soil in a better condition than you have it today. Now, regional agriculture, in fact, you see a lot of investments now, right? Just to contradict you. Okay? Oh yeah, it's a lot of investments, particularly in the case of using microbials. Okay, because microbials, as we all know, the soil, a healthy soil contains millions of microbes, right? So there's a lot of investments now. So I'm not talking too much. A lot of investments now that look at the use of, for example, biochar, modify soil structure, so that by incorporating the biochar into the soil, you provide a structure, a home for microbes to multiply. Some of them are in fact nitrogen-fixing microbes. Okay? So this is one example. There are many other examples. And this whole area of impact investment, regen agriculture, in fact, is one of the heavy areas for impact investment. We're going to talk to you a lot more about that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can I just check? Yeah, there's a lot of, oh, sorry.
You can use the lapel mic.
There's a lot of money going into regen agriculture, but it is a bit of a trendy term at the moment, and we really have to get in better position to measure regenerative agriculture. And it's because I know we work with one company that is looking at the measurement of regenerative agriculture, and probably in the 20 or so companies they looked at, only about 25% were actually delivering on their promise of regenerative agriculture.
Sustainability.
Yeah, so you've really got to be careful. It's going to get better with more and more sensing technology to determine the soil health and the inputs, etc., that are being delivered. It'll get better, but right now there's so much hot air around regenerative agriculture, and it will be to its detriment if we don't get a grip on the actual verification of that. We've gone through a real bad time over the last 2 years with verification technologies getting really slammed.
Maybe just to close it up, because that happens in one of my favorite topics. I've just written a chapter for a book on sustainable food security for ASEAN. And in fact, one of my premises is that there are different components, and the soil is a very important component to maintain sustainable farming systems or food systems for that matter. Yeah. Okay, we'll stop there. Anybody else wants to add? Or we open up? All good. Okay. Thanks for breaking the ice, by the way. Yes, please. Yeah.
Do that.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Ariel from Straits Times. I would like to ask a question regarding novel foods. So can novel foods really contribute to food security? We've seen some companies such as Good Food pausing their production of cultivated meat, as well as some others that have stated that scaling of production is a problem for them. Yeah. And
go one question at a time.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to go with that first?
Oh, yeah. So my response is that it's a bit like horses for courses, meaning novel foods will have a role to play, but with the caveat for which fraction of the society. Because are novel foods cheap? Journalists, are novel going to be cheap? So I rest my case. So I think the key point is, I think Andrew made that point as well, that actually there's been a bit of a hyperbole on this whole narrative, partly because actually for countries that are investing in it, it makes a lot of financial sense to have an income to return. But if you look at the brass tacks, what it really means, for a vast majority of people, even in an affluent country like Singapore, what would that role be? You know the answer. So I think my response to you would be, these are technologies that we need to evolve with the futuristic options that we may need to confront the shortage of food. But the key point is that if you talk about novel proteins, then clearly it's not novel proteins that we want to look at, but novel food systems, because man cannot live on proteins alone, quoting the Bible.
Yeah, part of the problem, one of the communication problems with the future food sector has been its over-promising and under-delivering. And that has been to its detriment, and now we're seeing investors turning their back on it. So, if somebody had gotten a grip of this at the beginning and said, look, we've got a heck of a lot of challenges with this. We can get there, but, we're not on this 1 to 3 year venture capital sort of seed. We're 10 years down the line. this. Some investors might have gotten turned off about that, but that is reality. And the scalability of some of these technologies is certainly questionable. And can it be overcome? Quite likely, but not the next 2, 3, 4, maybe longer years. So it's part of the communication problem that we're dealing with now.
Oh, yes, just briefly. I agree on that scalability aspect, because currently, who are the people who consume novel food and also the healthier food items? Normally, they are the more affluent people. And that's partly because the unit economics for novel food is still that it can only be sold at a higher price. Let's say if you were to replace beef or shrimp at a higher price. So how do we go from posh to mass? That is a challenge, making it more affordable. And also the perceptions of the people. I mean, for instance, I know that like in Singapore, we are trying to go, let's say, to powdered eggs. At some point, we looked at it and liquid eggs, right? But it depends on the perceptions of the individuals who will actually be using them. I remember when I mentioned this to my grandmother, she said, "Oh yes, we tried those during the World War before." These powdered eggs. Thank you.
I need to get the last word in, okay? Because you brought in food security. At the last workshop we had, somebody suggested that instead of the term alternative protein, we should be saying complementary protein.
Yes.
Now, that's actually my attitude as well, because novel food is not going to replace current so-called natural food. But we do need to find basically other foodstuffs that complement the growth in demand. Because the growth in demand is just crazy, I mean, with protein, even rice, like 2 million tons a year extra kind of thing, So without destroying the environment, like your point, we need to find ways to complement the increase in demand, but not to replace the demand itself. Okay. I'll stop here. Second question to you.
Yeah, so with regards to cultivating meat, cultivated meat, right? I understand that bioreactors are very much involved in producing these cultivated meat. And to use these bioreactors, you have to use up a lot of energy as well, which generates a very large carbon footprint. So how then will companies that are going forth with these technologies deal with the usage?
Who wants to try this?
I'll jump in. Are you ready?
No, I'm not a bioreactor.
Well, neither am I, but it is fermenting.
Good one.
This, the affordability and the sustainability issue around cultivated meat and the scalability is a challenge, and the energy it's certainly very high. I think the argument is that as we become more and more using more and more renewable energy, then we will get into a position where the sustainability of the cultivated meat may not be questioned so much as it is now. That applies to other technologies as well. But for Singapore, renewable energy is very challenging because we don't have a lot of waste out there, not like Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia. We can't import waste to make energy with it because that doesn't make any sense from a sustainability standpoint. So we need to find ways to solve that energy problem. We might just become a provider of the technical solutions, but where other renewable energy can be used. But for us in Singapore right now, that's a major challenge, I think.
I think I'll stop you there. Ellen, your hand. Microphone, please.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Adam Lyle from Padang & Co. I guess perhaps directed to you, Andrew and Paul. Part of the problem with sort of the cultivated meat and alternative proteins, although I agree complementary proteins is a better term, is the financial markets. Everyone's sort of looking for not even quick buck, but just seeing this is the new trend. This is the new trend. We've got to get on this boat. How can we necessarily kind of stop the financial markets and people chasing the almighty dollar? Whereas if we sort of sat around 5 years ago, we could have looked at some of the market data and talked about, listen, it's not going to take off that quickly. But, how do you sort of turn back the ocean? I mean, how are we going to control these? Because there's going to be the next. I mean, we're seeing a lot with carbon credits at the moment, and a lot of that's going to end in tears. Let's face it. We all can see that train wreck coming in certain areas. And there's going to be the next one and the next one. How do we do that? And part of it's your risk communications, but it's kind of controlling people's interest to make money. And I think we all believe, and that's a good thing. But how do we balance it?
Oh, darn.
Just an easy one for you.
It's a difficult one because all the models are the Silicon Valley models of the 1 to 3 years, and then agriculture doesn't work that way. I mean, GM crops were described as a really big step forward. Reduced 15 years from 15 years to produce a normal variety down to 8 years, and everyone's going, wait, that's really quick. But it still wasn't really suitable for a venture capital model, because no venture capitalist wants to wait 8 years. I would say
I mean, the VCs, a fund needs to sort of run 8 or more years. I mean, if you're looking at IPOs, then people are sort of wanting to see quick returns and things.
But I think some of the venture capitalists that you and I know, are prepared to go the distance. The Ag Fund does, and the Yield Lab kind of people. But a lot of the people going into it, which weren't bringing smart money into the game, that was part of the problem, or is part of the problem still. But now the smart money is is looking for something else to do. But as to how to change people's minds, well, I can only talk risk communication for so much. It's difficult, that one.
I think we're going to take a couple of questions from the chat, I think. Okay, there's one question here, comment, question. Sorry, I'm visually challenged here. Food will be scarce if the population increases. However, with the silver tsunami looming ahead in quite a few countries, will it be reduction in intake instead?
Okay, so that's a very clever question. I mean, it's absolutely true that the older you get, you require less calories. But the paradox is that you may need to eat a different form of quality of protein, i.e. less carbo, more protein. So it's a kind of a zero-sum game, right? So your calorie intake may need to come from proteins for maintaining your lean tissue and your dexterity of mobility. So I think it's partly true, but I won't say it's simple kind of a negative cancelling off the positive. So I think bravo to the guy who asked the question, or the lady, but I don't think it stacks up in terms of technical reality.
I hope whoever asked the question was listening. So, okay, let's I'm going to pick a couple more. Okay, this is an interesting one. Again, I'm not sure who will answer this one. Kenneth? Apart from safe food, we learned that it must also be just, meaning those producers should be paid with just wages and also just prices for their produced food. Is this something that food security should consider? They need to break cycles of poverty.
Answer is yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Next. Yeah. No.
You don't even have to answer. Yes. I think that food, it should definitely be a major factor, since, as I shared earlier, the smallholder farmers are the ultimate decision makers on how much food to produce. Unless we were in, let's say, countries where the states were the ones who paid for all of the food that would be produced and who would underwrite all of the risks. But until that happens, I think that agriculture as a profession should mature, and that we need more of the youth coming back into this sector as well. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to put somebody on the spot here, although he's busy texting. You wrote the last chapter of the book on the future, right? You want to try and answer this question? Basically about safety enough versus justice for the producer.
Trade-offs between safety and volume and everything. So I think
Also
that
justice.
justice.
Just food, yeah.
Okay. So I think justice is important because if there's too much injustice, there'll be revolution. So from both a conservative as well as a more liberal leaning point of view, food security should be very top of mind. So just to digress briefly, I think to me as a futurist, I'm usually of the plot, perhaps thinking of things from left field that could come in, not just random stuff like meteor shower, but even how other circumstances may affect this. So let me just offer two to the mix that I think will inflect your analysis. One of them is the future of work or lack thereof. So just think about how, if there's truly these gales of creative disruption that cause a lot of unemployment, I personally think that some design thinking in the food system around food system rather than novel food innovation might mean that the food system can soak up some of that, but you've got to design it and valorize it in a different way. So that's one. The other would be that I think that if the climate emergency effect becomes very acute, then some of the criticisms of novel food may be upended. If it's the only horse in the race because staple crops have been devastated or rampant disease. Okay, this is just on the half empty side. I'm an optimist, but if many food animal species exit, because of disease, then again, some of these things will be the only show in town. So hopefully by then there'll be this percolation down of some of these technologies to the masses from the elites. And so hence, I think that there is certainly a role for disruptive innovation, although we don't need to, we shouldn't lose the plot. So back to this thing about the short cycle, that's where the G comes in, not just in Singapore, but around the world, to take responsibility to make sure that there isn't a misallocation of capital and talent, just into shiny new things, but and to take the patient long view on multi-year. And I mean, this thing happens, as well. I think Singapore is doing it. I think many large states are doing that as well as a shiny stuff that the VC side is going in. So those things need to come to the fore as well.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, this whole idea of the complexity of food systems and the complexity of food security is often lost on some of the technologists. And it bothers me that we hear, when I go to pitch events, and I go to a lot of these pitch events, everybody's going, oh, we've got an answer for food security here, and we're going to make coffee out of brewer's spent grain. I'm going, okay, great. What about the smallholder farmers who depend on their lives and livelihoods for the coffee that they grow in the hills of Papua New Guinea? This is a complex issue, and when I pose this question to somebody who's producing coffee in that way or trying to produce coffee in that way, he said, oh, but they're going to lose their livelihoods anyway because of climate change. And I went, wrong answer. You need some RISCOM here, mate, so it bothers me this, technologies can be a solution, but it's a complex environment that we're applying these solutions to.
That was a provocative answer.
Sorry.
Okay, let me just try a couple more questions before we run out of time. Here's one for you, Prof. Jay, from Sweden. Sure, many seeds can be exploited for their carbohydrates and oil. The question is, how do you gather them together to extract these carbohydrates and oils?
Very good. So the only country in the world that I know of that has effectively done this is India for its mango seeds. So I think if you find a way of collecting seeds in a systematic way, because they're perishable, the good part about India is that they can grow it, dry it in the sun. So I think it's kind of the devil is in the detail. So if you don't even start looking at recycling or valorizing things that we throw away, which is not a part of our intellectual paradigm, right? And I think I want to come back to the question that gentleman asked. I mean, I find it amazing that not a single advanced company in the world looks at, in addition to the bottom line, corporate social responsibility. Is it all about making money? And I think if we can get a company to say, yes, I want to make money, but also can I look at making foods for the base of the pyramid? It's 3.5 billion people. And actually, another good example is that, there is a shampoo called Head and Shoulders, right? which I don't use obviously.
No, I don't.
The bottles in many parts of Asia are impossible to purchase because of the cost. A clever company in India produced a sachet for like a cent. And it's $1 billion business. The point is there's money to be made at the base of the pyramid. So I always keep saying, instead of wealth creation, why can't we also have health creation as a part of our paradigm? So it kind of answers both parts of your question. Yeah.
Actually, on that note, how many of you are familiar with Prahalad's book? Bottom of the Pyramid?
Yes.
Only 1, 2,
5.
Oh, that's good. It's a book that definitely should be recommended.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I wrote you to read.
Yeah.
Basically, you're making profits at the bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't
Very hard. Very hard.
Yes.
It's one of the questions in the back as well.
Oh, okay, sure. Microphone, please. Anyone over there?
Hi, my name is Sang Woo. I'm a student at the National University of Singapore. Dr. Montesclaros, you briefly touched on the smallholder farmers and the cultural divide between technology and those farmers. My project will look at farmers in Vietnam and having a dialogue with them. So how should such dialogues take place, and how do we convince a farmer that maybe only makes $300 a month to invest in a $2,500 drone that might not work?
You're not going to do it.
Thank you for that question, Sang-woo. Actually, I think that the youth play an important role. When I went to the International Rice Congress, I met 2 of these actually. So youth can be defined flexibly, right? Like until like maybe 40, 20 to 40 is still a youth. So these 2 people were, no absolute range. So these people were, one of them was a robotics graduate who was at the same time the representative of the farmers for before off-taking and all. And so he understands it, and he himself is a farmer. The other one was a drone tech provider, and one of their pilots owned like a 1.5 hectare farm as well. So I think it takes a farmer to trust another farmer, and it takes a young farmer to convince the older farmers as well. But the community is very important. And also based on a study by Croatia, we need both online and offline modes of engagement. And the people that, what they call the off-takers, or the ones who sort of aggregate the farmers' products before they're sold, these like village leads can play important roles in sort of evangelizing on the need for these technologies. Thank you.
I think we only have time for one last question, and I'm going to pick it from the chat. It's a question that probably any of you can answer, I think. While technological solutions offer promising ways to improve productivity, they often require significant infrastructure and investment. How can we ensure that these innovations reach and benefit the most marginalized and vulnerable communities, particularly in remote or underserved areas? It's you and the others as well, I think. Very general question on technologies. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just start with this on last words, right? So I know of this company in Indonesia called Cultiva, and we interviewed them as part of one of our earlier studies. So the challenge was like, how do you get these digital technologies to farmers, and how do you get people to pay for them? And this company is actually, what it does is it provides traceability solution. And with this traceability solution, it makes the products of farmers more exportable towards developed countries. Sorry. And as a result of that, when they are more exportable, they are then able to enter into these contract farming practices with established companies like Nestle or Givaudan. And so in the end, these companies end up paying to help the adoption of these technologies because they reduce these companies' overall production costs and improves their profitability. So that's one interesting business model that may be explored. Thank you.
You want to chip in? I'm good. Yeah.
I think, you talked about digitalization earlier on, and that is one area that, can really benefit the smallholder farmers if we do it right. And but we have to have the telcos in there and the accessibility to, telecommunications. We've got to get payment systems in place, and we've got to get the data to the farmers. And there are ways. I'm not going to give it away all now, but there are ways to do that. I mean, there are companies out there that can do that. And the important thing is to try and find a way that the smallholder farmer sips from the data lake. He doesn't have to chug a whole bottle of Coke. He can sip from the data lake. And there are ways to do that. Just connect to an API, get briefly, and get that actionable data from that API, and you can be away to the races.
Yeah, and if I may add briefly, so yeah, I think I totally resonate, especially, and I think another challenge is when people do cost-benefit assessments for these telcos, for expansion. I mean, the valuation of these assessments may underestimate the total value. Let's say if you assume that the user base is small or that they cannot be commercialized or monetized. But if we have, so I think starting small, having few small good cases is like key to further expansion potentially.
Well, I'm going to give a slightly different take on this. If you look at the technologies that were responsible for the first green revolution, it really wasn't so much digital or mechanical, it was seed. Because seed is the one technology that you can put all your science and tech into and give to the farmer. In the early days of the green revolution, first green revolution, there was the common belief that farmers would not use any seeds that they had to pay money for, number one. And secondly, that they will not pay for seeds that cost more than the conventional seeds. Now, all these have been proven wrong completely, especially for small farmers. If you're listening. Okay? Good example is GM seed. I studied that. When GM cotton seeds were first sold in China, they were twice the price of conventional cotton seed, right? But the farmers say, hey, if I don't grow GM seed, I'm not going to get a crop at all. So the farmers themselves, and smallholder farmers are not stupid. Okay, they look at the profit, the bottom line a lot, and they actually waited. And they decided to invest in buying those GM seeds, have a crop, and make a profit. The same thing happened with hybrid rice in India. I happen to know Norman Borlaug, the first Nobel Prize winner. They used to tell the story that when they first started to introduce hybrid wheat in India, everybody said, "You're crazy. Nobody's going to buy that." But yet, when the seeds were released, farmers were willing to buy it because they saw it as an investment for their future, and being able to make a profit. So the profit motivation is there. Now, of course, nowadays with the digital technology picture, things are slightly different because some of this require external investments. I think in our study, we found that not having cell towers in the right place, people are not going to have Wi-Fi, for example, things like that, But there are other technologies which smaller farmers can accept at much lower cost. Okay, with that, the host, I think we're running to the end now. Let me, on behalf of the panel, thank the audience who are zooming in, this audience as well. And of course, my last task is all of us to thank the panelists themselves and also
Thank you very much, Prof. And you did most of my work, but there's one person we still need to thank, which is Prof Teng, for moderating the session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us online, in person. And before I round off, it's only right. Oops. If I share about our next upcoming Head Foundation dialogue, which will be on the 25th of April. As you can tell, we are trying to unpack all these very, very challenging issues. The next one is, what is the role of artificial intelligence in education? Is it right? Are we getting it right? Are we wrong? This is a webinar. We won't be having it live because a lot of our speakers are from across the region. So do join us, do register on the QR code. If not, besides that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. And it's been a real pleasure to have you with us. We hope to welcome you again to another Head Foundation dialogue. Good evening.